Welcome back. In June of 2023, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that using affirmative action in college applicant acceptance is unconstitutional. Prospective students must be selected and accepted on the basis of merit, not race, gender, sexual orientation, or any other non-meritorious factor. After the decision was released, the Washington Post published an article that stated, elite universities have contended that without considering race as one factor in admissions, their student bodies will contain more whites and Asian Americans and fewer blacks and Hispanics. I was sorry but not surprised to see Thursday's Supreme Court decision disallowing affirmative action in college admissions. Much of the strength of our university system derives from its pluralism. It is crucial to allow institutions to set their own course in admissions and other matters essential to their missions. As former President Barack Obama's powerful statement this week on his own experience reminds us, admission policies focused beyond the test scores have allowed schools to make great contributions to social justice in the United States. The question for America's elite institutions is this: will they take true affirmative action and continue to use their vast resources and great human and social capital to include as many people as possible? And that's the end of the quote from them.
And Chris, recently, the state of higher education was released, and this is how it's summarized. It was pretty long, but this is the summary. Higher education in the United States and to varying degrees globally is in a period of significant strain and transition as of 2026. It faces demographic pressures, financial headwinds, shifting public perceptions of its value, policy and regulatory changes, technological disruption from AI, and ongoing debates about its ideological direction. While there are pockets of stability or modest growth, particularly at community colleges, the sector overall is grappling with questions of sustainability, relevance, and accountability. Now, enrollment rates in colleges and universities are down. 39% of people who do attend end up dropping out before they ever graduate. And out of that 39% that drop out, 74% say they drop out due to emotional stress, anxiety, depression, or mental health. 60% say they felt isolated or alone at college. 59% say finances were a huge factor, and 56% say they left school due to the coursework that they were given.
As many of us know, and as that state of higher education statement and the stats show, higher education is a big source of debate, and it has been for many, many years. Even if you're a strong proponent for college and higher education, I don't think you can argue that there are major problems with it right now. Many believe that college is just another way for liberals to further indoctrinate the younger generation. Many people have speculated that higher education is doing more harm than good for our society. People wonder if all colleges and universities are the same. Are our children better off having a higher education, or aren't they? Considering the amount of college debt students rack up, some question if the ROI, their return on investment, makes it worth going to college. And many have challenged whether a 4 or 6 year college education is even necessary to secure a good, financially solid career. Are there better alternatives to college? Following up on our episode on public school versus homeschooling, we decided to do a deep dive into higher education. We thought it was about time to get educated on higher education.
Well, let's start at the beginning, like we always like to, and we'll look at the history of higher education. And you might be surprised at the origin and the purpose of the two oldest educational institutions, higher education. The oldest university on record goes back to 859 AD in Morocco. It was called the University of Al Qarawiyyin. And if that sounds Muslim, that's because it is. It was founded by Fatima Al Fihri. She was a wealthy Tunisian woman who used her inheritance to establish a mosque and an associated school dedicated to Islam. The school was integrated into Morocco's state university system in 1963, and it's still active today. It specializes in Islamic teaching and religious research. Now, the second oldest college and the first university to award degrees was the University of Bologna in Italy. That was founded in 1088 AD. The original intent of the University of Bologna was to create a student-led secular institution focused on studying and teaching law, particularly Roman law and civil law. And it wanted to give students freedom to express themselves. Back in 1088, it,
Wow.
it didn't even have professors. Instead, it was run by guilds of students. The school was meant to give students a secular alternative free from religious instruction that was being taught in all the monastic schools that were controlled by the church at the time. The University of Bologna, still active today too, and it touts itself as a research university that promotes the values of peace and dialogue for all. Well, on their website, they say they promote equity, inclusion, and diversity, and that they intentionally look to enroll more diverse students than those of just Italian or European descent. The website says the school offers complete freedom of expression, but the only activities it shows the students engaging in are liberalist activities like the LGBTQ community, climate activism, condemning Israel, and condemning the U.S. in what they did in Gaza.
We'll do one more ancient school, one that you've probably heard of, and that's Oxford University, which was founded in 1096. Oxford University is the oldest English-speaking university in the world. It began as a center of teaching around 1096 and evolved from just a group of medieval schools into a college university during the 13th century, when it became a major intellectual center for theology and law. Some of its most famous graduates were John Wycliffe, John Wesley, and George Whitefield. In the 1530s, when Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries and sought to curb the Catholic Church's influence in England, Oxford shifted from Catholic teaching to a more Protestant-leaning institution. It shifted towards educating secular clergy and laymen rather than monks. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the university decided to broaden its curriculum. It abolished the religious requirements for degrees and became much, much more secular. It also encouraged and increased women's enrollment. Today, Oxford University's website says their mission is this, and I'm quoting them: to be a global center of excellence for lifelong learning. Courses will be underpinned by the best teaching, research, and support for learning to meet the needs of diverse, ambitious, and intellectually curious students. Staff and students will work together within and beyond Oxford to foster a vibrant learning community attentive to the importance of promoting sustainability and social justice. Go figure.
Yeah. So, Chris, moving to the U.S. now, if you recall last week, we said that because of the excellent education the Puritans gave their children, college and universities began to appear in America in the 1600s. Well, the first of these was Harvard, and it was founded by the Puritans in Massachusetts in 1636. Now, while it's eons from Harvard's mission today, the original intent for Harvard was to train clergy and to ensure that the Puritans had successive, literate, educated ministers. Harvard's original mission statement said, and I'm quoting, "Harvard seeks to advance learning and perpetuate it to posterity rather than leave it to churches in the wilderness." In other words, the Puritans didn't want uneducated, unbiblical, illiterate pastors leading churches. A Harvard
And we can see why.
yeah, we could definitely see why. They knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
Harvard education focused on religious studies, theology, and classical studies, which, just as in their education of their younger children, reflected the Puritans' commitment to knowledge. These guys were really intelligent and they wanted their kids to be really intelligent. Harvard was named for a Puritan minister, John Harvard, and when he died, he left half of his estate and his library of several hundred books to the institution, so they named it after him. John Adams, John Hancock, Joseph Warren, and Samuel Adams were famous early graduates of Harvard, guys who were instrumental in forming the country.
Definitely. Another early college in the U.S. was the College of William and Mary, and it was founded in Williamsburg, Virginia in 1693. It was chartered by and named for King William III and Queen Mary II. It was primarily established as a seminary to train young men to become Anglican clergy in the Virginia colony. Its mission was to educate them in divinity and philosophy and also enable them to teach the Christian faith to Native Americans. Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe are among its most prestigious graduates. Other schools like Princeton, Dartmouth, Yale, and Brown also soon appeared. All of the colleges in early America had three major similarities. They were primarily established to provide an excellent, deeper Christian education to America's youth, to spread the gospel to Native Americans, and third, to produce strong religious, civic, and intellectual leaders with a strong focus on training them for a possible career in ministry or law. They all prided themselves on turning out elite, learned, moral men, and they did this by having them study the classics, study Greek and Latin, and study theology. And it's pretty ironic that all but one of those Ivy League schools, which are considered the premier schools of the country today, were originally founded as Christian colleges. And another important note, at this point, primary education went up to only 8th grade. So many entering college would have been like 12 to 14 years old. And Rose, there is no way, except for a few smattering kids that just are whatever, weirdly brilliant, I will say, not weird. There's no way you could do that with an 8th grader today.
Right. Yeah. And again, it just shows you the kind of education Puritans gave their children that
Yeah.
they were able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Chris, all of the schools you mentioned were private colleges. The first public college in the United States was chartered in 1793, and it was the University of North Carolina. This was the first institute of higher learning that was funded by the government, the state government of North Carolina. And the state had a few reasons for doing it. They wanted to fulfill North Carolina's state constitutional mandate that higher education was to be extended to all people of the state for little or no expense. They also wanted to meet the growing demand in their state for skilled workers, and they wanted to support the state's economic development. Now, soon after the University of North Carolina opened, more public universities emerged. In the mid-19th century, state schools, these public universities, shifted their focus. And this was due to land grant acts that were happening. And what that was that gave states federal lands to build state schools if those schools concentrated on agriculture, mechanical, and scientific education. The federal government did this because they needed a specialized workforce as the United States was entering the progressive era and the Industrial Revolution. And Chris, as with everything, it seems, once the government got involved, things went downhill pretty fast.
In 1915, John Dewey and Arthur Lovejoy co-founded the American Association of University Professors. This established what they called academic freedom and tenure. Academic freedom meant that professors could teach whatever they wanted to students, no matter how controversial or political or anti-Christian. Tenure assured that after teaching for a certain number of years, they could not be fired for it, or really for much else other than assaulting a student. John Dewey was a philosopher and a psychologist who fully was on board with all the liberal progressive era agenda. He was instrumental in replacing the rigorous religious study colleges had in their curriculum with what he called experiential doing. If you remember from last week's episode, during this time in lower public schools, textbook learning and actual class time study was being replaced with students, quote unquote, expressing themselves. The same thing was happening in colleges and universities. Dewey pushed relativism and objective moral truth, which, if you are not familiar with what that means, there's no absolute truth. Your truth is relative to you, and my truth is relative to me, and the clash comes when they don't meet, which I don't care what two people you have, at some point down the line, they're not going to meet.
Without a doubt.
And that idea of no absolute truth applies to the Bible for them too. Dewey was a huge proponent of social adjustment, meaning rather than expecting students to meet high standards in education, he wanted to lower the standards so that more students could meet them. He believed that schools should mainly focus on creating productive members of society. How you link those two things together, I have no idea. And that was a huge transition from the original college's objective of producing learned moral men, and even further destroying the academic excellence of higher education. Dewey pushed student-centered learning. He reduced the authority and role of the professor as the expert on a subject, and instead, he was just, at this point, a facilitator of student discussions.
Like I said, government gets involved, everything goes downhill.
Yep.
Now, Arthur Lovejoy wasn't nearly as liberal as Dewey. For example, he was against professors spewing any kind of anti-war views to students or even in public during World War I. But he did agree with Dewey on many things, and he did help make academic freedom and tenure the norm for all public colleges and universities. There was another figure during this time that drastically reshaped higher education, and his name was Robert Maynard Hutchins. He was the president of the University of Chicago from 1929 to 1951. Hutchins championed the Great Books program, and he shifted the curriculum from religious or vocational training to liberal intellectualism. Hutchins despised vocations. He viewed teaching vocations as inferior, and it was a distraction from a true liberal education. He abolished all the practical courses at the University of Chicago and replaced them with highbrow discussion courses of what he called the greatest books ever written. So they were book clubs. And Chris, FYI, the Bible was not one of the great books on his list.
No kidding.
Students who graduated from the University of Chicago under his presidentship had no practical real-world skills, but they could give you a lively discussion on Shakespeare's Hamlet.
And that's marketable.
Yeah. Hutchins even abolished football and other sports at the school, as well as some other traditional majors, because he thought they distracted from a true liberal education. Chicago, imagine that they were at the forefront.
I was just thinking that. Oh, look at Chicago today, right? Oh boy. Well, another big hit to higher education occurred after World War II under liberal Democratic President Franklin Roosevelt, the same guy who's responsible for the deplorable state of welfare in America. But he had a hand in damaging education too. FDR pushed and got passed the GI Bill of Rights Act in 1944. This act made higher education affordable for veterans by giving them federal funds to put towards their tuition. Now, that doesn't sound so bad. And in and of itself, it wasn't bad. But again, the federal government gets involved and it antes up the money. And like we've said already, things tend to go to pot. FDR insisted that higher education was an essential economic right of every American. His GI Bill and other New Deal policies that gave regular citizens federal money for college made college enrollment skyrocket. FDR used this leverage on the colleges to insist that they strengthen democracy and impart knowledge to their students by promoting social and economic justice. Even further, The Truman Commission was established, which launched a network of community colleges. These government-funded community colleges made higher education even more affordable for Americans. They also gave the government even more control over higher education.
Chris, fast forward to 1946. Things don't get any better. Senator William Fulbright established a student international exchange program designed to promote mutual understanding between the U.S. and other nations through study, research, and teaching. We have it now, foreign exchange program. It was funded by the U.S. State Department, and it allowed thousands of students to study abroad annually in over 160 countries. Fulbright said the goal was to foster international cooperation and prevent future world wars through education and cultural exchange. Now, this exchange program gave a major push to the liberal agenda, stemming from both the changed ideology of American students who went abroad and studied in much more liberal countries than America, as well as the influence of foreign students who came to America and attended college here. Some of the major shifts that came as a result of the international exchange program was prioritizing globalism over nationalism, valuing multiculturalism and diversity over citizenship, embedding skepticism towards traditional American exceptionalism or sovereignty, and garnering large support for, get this, open borders, global institutions, and social liberalism.
In 1965, championed by President Lyndon Johnson, the Higher Education Act was passed. This act dramatically expanded the federal government's role in post-secondary education. Its stated goals were to strengthen colleges and universities while providing financial assistance to make higher education accessible regardless of income or zip code. Later, Title IV created the framework for modern federal student aid, Pell Grants, guaranteed student loans, work-study programs, and outreach initiatives which targeted low-income students. The government authorized funds to be given to institutions that specifically served minority or lower-income populations. Through this act, the government gave large ongoing subsidies and loans, which gave them even more control over colleges and universities. Millions more people enrolled in college. The top of the list were baby boomers, women, and minorities. This had rippling effects on colleges. Campuses now had large groups of first-generation, non-traditional, and lower-income students. The effects of this were seen in the 60s and the 70s with violent protests, hippies, and a radical counterculture that was coming out of these universities. Schools exploited the system by bloating their administrations and faculty and by creating majors that pushed the liberal ideology. Even traditional liberal arts core courses were replaced with more quote-unquote relevant courses that focused on poverty and race and gender and power. And all of these courses began with the premise that America was structurally oppressive.
Most of the college environments pushed progressive causes like anti-war and identity politics, while marginalizing and villainizing conservative and Christian causes. The continual flow of federal funds to colleges and universities came with strings attached. Colleges were under pressure by the government to adhere to enrollment quotas and to serve disadvantaged populations. And as a result, schools moved from being a place of higher learning to adapting a curriculum and to gearing campus life towards equity and social relevance, while fostering an environment suspicious and critical of traditional American values and structures. Institutions that accepted federal funds, and nearly all did, even some private ones, became subject to evolving federal priorities, including equity mandates on admissions, athletics, hiring, grievance processes. The government had their hand in everything. They forced universities to prioritize access to the school over academic rigor or even cost. Initially, the federal government's intervention's aim was to increase access for more students. But Chris, as it always does, it resulted in colleges being dependent on federal funding. And this totally disrupted the economic model for universities. It reduced their efficiency and it reduced the overall value to kids.
Yeah, here are some examples. The government insisting on the massification of higher education led to a decline in the quality and the rigor of the academics in universities. The government wanted students who would otherwise not qualify to be accepted into college to not just be able to go, but also to be able to graduate. Not wanting to lose their federal funds, college lowered the admissions bar, some even throwing out required SAT scores. And to ensure that these unqualified students graduated, professors were told to water down the content of their courses and do whatever else was necessary to maintain passing rates and to get positive student evaluations.
Now, you'd think that the federal government throwing more and more money at colleges and universities would result in lower tuitions for students. That's what they said it was for. But much like when the government took over healthcare with Obamacare, it had exactly the opposite effect. The government's involvement in higher education and throwing more and more money at it actually resulted in a sharp rise in tuition and costs for students. Now, this concept is known as the Bennett hypothesis, and that hypothesis says that universities raised tuition in order to get more federal money. We'll give you some statistics to show that that's true. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York found that for every dollar increase in subsidized student loan caps, tuition rose by 60 cents. So as more federal money became available for students to borrow, colleges made it more expensive to attend. Some institutions responded to the increased available federal aid by reducing their own federal aid packages available for students. So effectively, the school was just pocketing the federal money. They weren't offering any student aid to kids anymore.
The increased federal money and increased federal regulations put on public higher education pushed these colleges to massively expand their administration, meaning non-instructional staff. Many college administrations are so bloated, they average one non-instructional admin for every 6.9 students that are enrolled. This money that's spent on expanded administration has taken away money spent on actual instruction of the students. In fact, between 1993 and 2007, as federal funds flowed more and more, administrative spending per student jumped 61%, whereas instructional spending only rose by 39%. Further, to attract more students who weren't interested in going to college for the actual education, schools began competing on non-academic luxuries like lavish dorms and dining halls rather than pursuing academic excellence. The result has been that since 2006, men and women are holding $1.753 trillion in college debt.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. And Biden wanted to forgive it all, but
Yeah.
there is no forgiveness. It's still out there. Someone's got to pay for it. So, Chris, what is the state of higher education today? Well, many schools have adopted the practice of what's been called the ratchet effect. And this is where liberal staffers and professors only hire those who have similar viewpoints, leading to a steady long-term shift away from conservative viewpoints. A study done in 1999 and then again in 2007 showed that most universities' leftward tilt was severe, and that's probably no surprise to anyone. And further not being a surprise, it's most pervasive in California.
Go
For
figure.
example, at the University of California in Berkeley, in the social science department, the ratio of Democrats to Republican faculty was 21-1. In the sociology department, the faculty had 17 Democrats and 0 Republicans. And I'm not even sure why they know the political stance of faculty, but apparently it's a question they ask.
Yeah, apparently.
The political science department has 28 Democrats, 2 Republicans. The English department, 29 Democrats, 1 Republican. And the history department had 31 Democrats and 1 Republican. And yeah, that was California, but they expanded the study nationwide in 2017, and it found that in public universities, liberal college staffers outnumber conservative ones an average of 12 to 1. Most higher education institutions have abandoned teaching critical thinking to students in favor of just telling them how they should think.
Another very recent study was done, again in California, this time by the California Association of Scholars, but was compared to other public universities across the nation and found that there is a definite trend. They came to this conclusion, and I'm going to quote them here. The politicization of higher education by activist professors and compliant university administrators deprives students of the opportunity to acquire knowledge and refine their minds. It also erodes the nation's civic cohesion and its ability to preserve institutions that undergird democracy in America. And that's the end of the quote. Here's some of what they found that led them to that conclusion. And again, I'm going to quote them. Students who graduate from college are increasingly ignorant of history and literature. They are unfamiliar with the principles of American constitutional government, and they are bereft of the skills necessary to comprehend serious books and effectively marshal evidence and argument in written work. This decline in the quality of education coincides with a profound transformation of the college curriculum. None of the 9 general campuses in the UC system requires students to study the history and institutions of the United States. None requires students to study Western civilization, and on 7 of the 9 UC campuses, a survey course in Western civilization is not even offered. In many political science departments, majors need not take a course in American politics. Moreover, the evidence suggests that the hollowing of curriculum stems from too many professors' preference for promoting a partisan political agenda. And I'll just end there.
And again, I can't imagine anybody is shocked right now.
No.
There was an article entitled A Crisis of Competence, and it was written by scholars concerned about the state of higher education. They said that the vast majority of public university faculty believe that they should teach students to be agents of social change rather than teach them the classics of Western civilization. Like we said, some of them don't even offer classes on Western civilization.
Right.
Many universities openly tout their far left liberal ideology. No kidding. UCLA's School of Law says that their aim is to transform racial justice advocacy. The mission statement from their Women's Studies program says that the issues in the Women's Studies program are presented from, and I'm quoting, the perspectives of those whose participation has been traditionally distorted, omitted, neglected, or denied. And Chris, here's some irony. That Academic Freedom Act that was passed by the American Association of University Professors back in 1915 that you talked about, that said that college professors could teach whatever they want without consequences. Well, yeah, that just goes one way today. The AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, now says that professors are restricted to only use relevant materials, and they also make them provide a reasonably comprehensive treatment of a subject.
And where they get these few conservative or Christian professors who are left is that AAUP decides what is relevant and what comprehensiveness looks like. In most cases, the AAUP has defined relevant and comprehensive as what is needed to transform America in a progressive direction. And they do this while simultaneously and implicitly teaching students that conservative ideas are contemptible and unworthy of any discussion. And the government has gotten in on this, again, using the dangling carrot of federal money. Federal grants for research have become subject to cancellation based on political shifts. This has created financial instability in college research departments and many worthy research projects just being abandoned because They don't have any federal money anymore. And that has stalled scientific progress in a lot of areas.
Yep. Yep. Now you can't even just research anything you want. It has to
No.
line up with their ideology. Chris, before we get to answering the initial questions we asked, we want to play a compilation of clips from recent interviews that Elon Musk gave on the subject of education. Now, Elon did graduate from college, but he has some pretty strong thoughts about it, and he makes some really good points. So give a listen.
Do you agree with Peter Thiel about the unnecessariness of university, higher education?
University education is often unnecessary. That's not to say it's unnecessary for all people, but I think you probably learn about as much, or the vast majority of what you're going to learn there in the first 2 years, and most of it is from your classmates. Now for a lot of companies, they do want to see the completion of the degree because they're looking for someone who's going to persevere and see it through to the end, and that's actually what's important to them. So it really depends on what somebody's goal is. The amount of indoctrination that's happening in schools and universities is, I think, far beyond what parents realize. And I sort of came to realize this somewhat late. The experience that we had in high school and college is not the experience that kids today are having. I suppose in some cases that parents, but I think like the parents are just generally not aware of what their kids are being taught or what they're not being taught. You don't need college to learn stuff, okay? Everything is available basically for free. You can learn anything you want for free. It is not a question of learning. There is a value that colleges have, which is like, seeing whether can somebody work hard at something, including a bunch of sort of annoying homework assignments, and still do their homework assignments, and kind of soldier through and get it done. That's like the main value of college. And then also, if you probably want to hang around with a bunch of people your own age for a while instead of going right into the workforce. So I think colleges are basically for fun and to prove you can do your chores.
I think Elon makes a lot of sense of things he says.
Yeah, I do too. And I totally agree with him.
Okay, so after all the information we looked at, let's answer our initial questions. Are kids better off having higher education today or not? Is higher education doing more harm than good in our society?
Well, there's what has been called the reverse Flynn effect. And it says that since the mid 1970s, there's been a decline in intelligence and IQs in several Western developed nations like Norway, Denmark, the UK, France, and the Netherlands, and Australia. The declines are typically 2 to 7 IQ points per generation, or 0.2 to 0.3 per year. And the major declines were in fluid reasoning, verbal, and numeric skills. So to put it simply, people are getting worse at critical thinking, communication, and math. And Rose, those are all critical things.
Yeah, I would say so.
They're critical for society.
We've all seen people who can't even make change without the darn cash register or a calculator.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's part of the reason people don't talk today when they're in public.
Yeah, because they don't have
They
communication
just pop
skills.
in their earbuds and go on with their day, and they don't have to deal with anybody.
Yeah.
In the US, a similar study was done between 2006 and 2018 with similar results. Americans showed a drop in being able to critically think, communicate, or perform computational reasoning. Now, to be fair, these studies were of the population in general, not college students. The factors most contributing to the decline are increased screen time, fragmented attention span, and they cite social media as a big culprit attributing to this, less reading and deep focus, poorer sleep, and environmental toxins. Some who conducted these studies even went so far as to say that things being dumbed down, like simplified media or just asking AI for answers, is causing an epidemic of functional illiteracy. Now, granted, higher education is not to blame for a lot of this. In fact, it's probably an indictment on the whole education system. But obviously, colleges aren't doing anything to help reverse the trend. In fact, in some colleges, they're perpetuating them.
Yep, without a doubt. Rather than emphasizing comprehension and deep thought and critical thinking of material taught by an expert, most college students are just being taught what they need to know to pass a test. And remember, the course material is already being dumbed down. So kids are just being fed facts from already watered down material so they can spit back the answers, pass the test, and graduate. And Chris, here's a really fascinating statistic I found while doing research. Studies show that people in the 1800s had better problem solving skills, were better critical thinkers, and were quicker and more clever than people today. Now, I wasn't surprised by that, but what I was surprised by was that many studies linked the difference to fertility. People had way more kids in the 1800s than they do today. And many researchers think that a major contributing factor was having kids, more than one kid, or having any kids. Now, I know that's not really on the subject of higher education, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. I mean, having kids, especially more than one, definitely forces you to be a problem solver, to critically think, and at least be sharper and more clever than your kids are.
Well, Rose, I think it does sort of have to do with higher education because the prices are up so much that for decades now, women have had to go out and work and they don't have as many kids.
That's
And
true.
if you have to deal with five other people, of various ages in your life, you got to have skills.
Yeah,
And they're skills that are developed by interacting with them.
absolutely.
So back to higher education. Given the astronomical tuitions, is it worth going to college today? Will you ever get a ROI on all the money you put out? Or is it going to be a good investment? Is college necessary for a financially stable career, or are there better alternatives? Well, there isn't an absolute answer to this. There are some careers that are impossible to pursue without an undergraduate or even a graduate level education. Doctors, nurses, teachers, some fields of engineering, lawyers, etc. Now, granted, maybe some people are brilliant enough and, could use free resources to be proficient in any one of those fields. But would you really want a doctor operating on you who did not go to college and then medical school and do a residency and an internship? Well, no.
Yeah. Chris, can you hear?
So,
look, I'm going to take your appendix out, Chris. I didn't go to any kind of medical school, but I've watched the YouTube video.
yeah, well, you know what? They had a commercial like that. I don't remember what it was for right now, but they had some commercials like that. So obviously, higher education is necessary in some instances. And for those careers, the return on investment is worth it. But there are many areas of study that not only is your ROI not worth it, but going to college is totally useless. Gender studies, intersectionality, queer theory, anthropology. Major in these areas, and not only won't you find a job when you graduate, you're going to probably be a much less productive member of society.
There is a center in the middle of these two areas of study that maybe you need more education beyond high school, but you don't necessarily have to spend $200,000 at a 4-year school. Piloting, electrical engineering, any of the trades, dancing, art history, writing, and things like that. You might only need 2 years of school, maybe just a specialized school, maybe individual classes, or utilizing free resources that are available. Any of those things is better. At least in a specialized school, you're only going for what you want and you're not taking all the core classes. So just something to consider. Okay, last question, and it's an important one after we just spent the last hour basically trashing higher education. Are all colleges created equally? Chris?
Well, obviously, the answer is absolutely not. All that we looked at was, for the most part, public universities and colleges, which state schools. And there are definitely some private schools that fall into the same category, like Ivy League schools, because they get a lot of federal funding also. But there are some good colleges that still offer a classic education, that still teach real content from expert professors, and they still encourage students to think critically for themselves. And these schools have refused to take any federal funds because they don't want the ties. They don't want the federal government having any control over what and how they teach and how they run their school. And no surprise, most, if not all, are Christian colleges. Top of the list is a school that we both love, Hillsdale College in Michigan. Hillsdale doesn't even allow its students to take out federal loans. They want complete autonomy from the federal government.
Other schools are Christendom College in Virginia, Grove City College in Pennsylvania, Boyce College in Kentucky, Patrick Henry College in Virginia, Wyoming Catholic College, New St. Andrews College in Idaho, Pensacola Christian College in Florida, and Crown College in Tennessee. Now, all of them, by not accepting any federal funding, these schools are free of the liberal, bureaucratic control of the federal government, who would force them to teach things that go against their Christian beliefs. They aren't required to adhere to Title IX, which is the thing in athletics, or any other federal mandates. So now you might wonder, well, how do they survive? Well, they survive by relying heavily on private donations and endowments. Not only do those donations and endowments keep their school running, but it allows them to offer students financial aid directly from the school. No ties to federal student loans, no federal grants. The aid comes directly from the school.
And Rose, I just want to say one thing. John and I talk about it all the time. I mean, women's sports, it's great to have women's sports, but this Title IX enforcing everybody to have it that's federally funded is a drain monetarily.
Yes, it is.
Women's sports do not make money. They do not bring in the money. And it's just a drain. So all these things sound good at first, that's how it's meant to be, for it to sound good so that people want it or think it's a good thing. But again, it's not. So we hope all of this was helpful to you. And we hope that you learned a little bit of things that you didn't know about higher education. Drop us an email, a message, or leave us a comment and let us know if you have found this episode helpful. Have a blessed day, everybody.